Do you know what makes it hard?
What?
The entire avenue of entrepreneurship is stepping in faith because and it's unique to each one of us. So you have all these people that are trying to create pathways to cookie cutter pathways to bring people to entrepreneurship. But it's really impossible to ever achieve entrepreneurship by following a pathway such as that. Because your pathway to entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurship is going to be different than mine. And it's going to be different than each person listening to this.
Awekenge, this is Mental Methods, hosted by Asekho Toto.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Methods. I'm your host, Asekho Toto. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation. Definitely, when I was compiling in a way of wanting to this conversation, how to go with it, and a point of reference was your profile on Hotmatch. So you've been described as a legend and a high energy guest. What do you attribute to your ability to connect with people and inspire them to achieve their goals?
Yeah, Asekho, I've been a guinea pig for all the works I do today. So I know what life's struggling through life. I know what's scraping by to only achieve mediocrity. I know like all of that stuff firsthand. And what brings about my passion and my heart into this is finding the SMT method coming about, like the whole thing coming about and stuff has been such a blessing in my life that I want to share it with as many people as I possibly can and help. My mission that I'm on is to help millions of people to live better lives through the SMT method, through the subconscious conditioning.
And before we get into that SMT method more in depth, I just wanna, in terms of explain to us the concept of the power of this subconscious mind and its role in shaping our thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors, because I feel like it's quite important as it comes to thoughts and beliefs and behaviors in business. So how is it so important for business success?
I would say it's critical. Any area of life that we're discontent in, that we're not achieving the results we want, and business specifically, So if I go through really quick a model of it, so we have a conscious mind, right? And we all know about the conscious mind. We have things like The Secret and all kinds of inspirational, motivational, religious things like that, like with the conscious mind and what we focus on and things like that, And then we have the subconscious, and within the subconscious, there's this motherboard of all of our conditioning, our patterns, our paradigms, our experiences. Asekho, even an experience that you may have not had on your own, but somebody told you about, shapes into your subconscious, okay? Now, in the conscious mind is the knowing of what we want. That's all in our conscious mind. Within that motherboard, that's what triggers our brain waves to the actions we take or that we don't take. So a business owner who's struggling for growth and doesn't believe they can do 5 times, 7 times, 10 times, 20 times beyond what they're doing now will never achieve that because that conditioning will not trigger the brain waves to take the actions that will get us there. So when we can identify that conditioning in the motherboard and then shift that, which we do, the SMT method does a great job right from day one. And then we start opening up the door to greater possibilities. And as we start opening up the door to greater possibilities, we start achieving greater results. I know if somebody's not achieving the business growth they want, let's say, It's nothing outside of them. It's not competition or, like the state of the economy or anything else that's causing the lack of that growth. It's that subconscious conditioning.
Mm, 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 mm. And you spoke about in terms of the conscious, and we spoke about in terms of conditions. I feel like in a way of this question, it's quite important because as we speak the power of the subconscious, and we believe that when we have these big dreams that we have in our minds that we can achieve them. But in that perspective, there are some sort of limitations, as one I can rephrase them into conditions of saying that you can't actually make it if you do this and this and this, or let's say you grow up in an environment that you think that might affect your beliefs or your success of doing, for example, having a business. And in that business, let's assume that it's a bookstore, and most of the businesses in a place of where people don't usually read. So how do you actually destroys those limitations of people saying that, or canceling that outside noise of saying that people that you won't succeed at that business?
Yeah, and there are certain criterias with it, right? If we open up a gas station on a corner that has 7 or 8 or 10 other gas stations, we're probably not going to do as great as if we go find an area that's a little bit away. So there is that side of things and stuff. But the conditioning within us, like I said, it will hold us back from taking the actions. So we can be the most positive thinking people in the world. But if we don't clarify what's in that subconscious, the patterns, programs, and all of that stuff, we'll never achieve those higher levels.
Chris Williamson is big on speaking of inaction, and it's something that I also have realized that people, it's easier to not do the action of not actually getting into their minds, actually telling themselves, "Oh, flip, let me do that. Let me do this. Let me do this." And same goes with business. Something that I've seen. South Africa is a place that we are very encouraged to start businesses and in a way of become employers, so that, as probably you might know, in terms of an employment rate is so high. It's around, I think, 32 or 34% around the youth. So it's a big thing. So inaction plays a huge role in that, because one can start a business and another can see, oh, flip, that person started a business, but at the same time, he has failed. So within your work, within that perspective of actually the power of the subconscious, how do you actually motivate those people to actually not look at what other people have done, but look at themselves? How can they improve from seeing those mistakes that are being done by those people?
Absolutely. And it's not a light switch, right? Somebody that has conditioning that goes, well, somebody told me this and it didn't work for them, so I'm not going to do that. It's not just a switch that we turn. The way the SMT method is designed is we come out of the gate developing what's called a dynamic vision. And the SMT method hosts the road mapping tools to develop that vision. And then once we get that vision, what we start doing is traversing that gap between where we are now and where we want to be. We're developing systems of accelerating habits that are not a one-size-fit-all. And that's one of the big keys with the SMT method. It's not a one-size-fit-all program. It sets up the pathway for that discovery of those things. But then as we start stepping in, even in developing the vision, we have to start tapping up against that conditioning that stops us from thinking how, most people can't tell you what they want. And the people that can, they'll usually base what they want on their current situations and circumstances. So what we have to do in the dynamic vision is we have to get outside of that. And what's that full potential? What's the one that's just going to light you on fire and excite your life, and want you to give back and do all that stuff? And so even in developing that, we're going to tap against that conditioning. And then within the SMT method, it hosts the tools to shift that conditioning, to get it more in alignment. And then all of a sudden we start triggering the brain waves that lead to what we want to achieve. Most of the time, if somebody's unable to take action, it's not that they don't want their desires and they don't want the business growth. What's holding them back is fear. Fear of what other people have told them, fear of their past experiences, fear of that conditioning, fear of like even quite a few of my clients I've worked with over the past decade have been afraid of success and what that looks at, because when they were raised, successful people weren't good people. And they were taught that, and they don't want to be a bad person. So there's so many things that tie into it. Even just the fear of I've tried this already, I've tried to start a business before and it failed, and everything that came with that and everything will stop us, cause procrastination, all the things that stall us from taking the action. So when we're coming from the vision and we're looking at our situations, circumstances, the things around us is just what it looks like as that vision is unfolding, and we get a spark into that and we start seeing a change, all of a sudden, instead of being pushed by pain, we're pulled by that vision, by the excitement of what we're experiencing. And that's how people rapidly grow businesses, grow their life, change their life at a rapid pace as we get into that excitement of that vision coming to fruition.
Whilst you were speaking, I remembered I actually had the thought of actually speaking about actually overcoming that fear, actually doing the thing. And again, quoting Chris Williamson, where he said that thinking about doing the thing isn't doing the thing. And also it goes back to me. And when I started this podcast, I didn't know that it would grow the way it has grown. And I didn't think that I will go over 100 episodes of actually doing this forever and almost doing it for free, and not actually help. As you've said, when you started this, you want to help people in terms of actually when it comes to business. On myself, I want to help people in terms of when it comes to mental health. So how do you incorporate in terms of how do you make sure that people are not thinking about the money, and as you spoken about fame and about success, whereas some people are afraid of how people are treating, how successful people treat normal people, whereas in terms of kindness in this gesture, how do we make sure that your clients focus on they Firstly, let me ask this question to you. Do you believe in that blind faith, in terms of blind faith, of actually not knowing that this thing, you keep continue doing this and you don't know the result, what type of results that you will have, but at the same time, you have that positive mindset?
You have to. You have to. And when we develop that vision, we develop it big enough. The ideal answer for a client I'm working with when they look at their vision is the comments such as, I don't know how the heck I'm going to make this happen. That's a dynamic vision, because reality, we don't know how to make it happen. And so instead of going through the process, what a lot of people will do is they'll look for the ABC plan that'll get them to D. And they'll follow this stuff, and you have so many people going through that ABC plan, and they're working exhaustively, and they're taking massive actions, exhaustive efforts, trading off their life for, and it's recorded and shown that we get minimal results the more we do that. So the more extensive hours we put in, the less results we get from it. When we get excited and ignited about having this dynamic vision and seeing that, and getting into that place of seeing that happen in our life, all of a sudden we become more motivated, more exciting. And ultimately what happens to almost 1,000 clients I've worked with over the past decade, their excitement towards that vision as it starts showing up becomes greater than their fears. And as their fears come up, we shift that and we put it in perspective, and it allows them to open up even more. Blind faith, absolutely. The SMT method, I could not have sat down, even after all the stuff I've done since I've been 28 years old in this line, as far as the mind, total mindset, the conscious, subconscious, how they work independently and interdependently. I could not have put this together on my own. I did not know everything I was going through would lead to the SMT method. All I knew is that I wanted to inspire, motivate, and lead people to live better lives. And that's still when I was in a corporate America, sales position that I knew that. And I just continued following this, not knowing where the next step would lead. And then once I connected that my total mindset, all of a sudden things just started exploding. I mean, as far as the vision, my vision got bigger, the what was showing up was bigger, and it just became this thing of excitement more so than drudgery and forcing myself to do stuff I couldn't stand and things like that.
Mm.
One of the things I'll tell you is that I've learned is successful people, they don't do certain things. They don't go through the laundry list of all these things you have to do. Successful people get into alignment and do things a certain way. That's what that whole developing systems of accelerating habits that's unique to the individual I'm working with starts coming through. I'm not setting up a system. I don't tell every client, here's what you have to do, and here's what you have to do, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and a laundry list and exhaustive to-dos and all that. I help them find out what lights them up, what puts them in that place where they're in their attraction mode, what puts them in that place where they're living life the way they want to live it. And as we do more of that, those blind faith opportunities, what some people will call circumstances, what I call alignment, will just start showing up easier and quicker in our life.
Mm, mm, mm. And just to actually, again, going back to in terms of that blind faith, and I feel like it's quite really important because the reason why I'm bringing this up is the fact that when I was doing this, and I feel like purpose really plays a role in when it comes to success. Purpose is something that I've seen for me that flip, this thing was for me. And having that agency of, I want to do this. I feel like most people don't actually have that agency of actually want to make a difference. I was listening to a podcast, and the guest was Jimmy Kerr, where him and Chris Williamson were speaking about agency, because some people have this perception, no, I won't do this, someone else will do it, so I don't see the point of me doing it. For example, we spoke about this thing of actually seeing a person doing it, so thinking that you weren't able to do it. For example, let's take example. I compare myself to Jordan Peterson and saying that he does a podcast based on mental health. So people won't actually listen to me. They will actually listen to him, and because he has a big platform, and I feel like it's the way of perspective of shifting it. To me, it's more or less of, how can I learn from Jordan Peterson so that when it comes to learning in terms of questioning, in questioning my guest, how can I shape that? How can I make it interesting? To me, it's all about perspective, actually. It's all about perspective. It depends where your mind's at. If you're always negative, you'll always be negative in a way of like, I can't do this, so I'm letting it go.
Absolutely, yeah. And with that, what it is, if you and I talked for a little while, I would find out what ignites you about what you do, and that will be your purpose. And as we tap into that, you do that in a way nobody else could ever do it. And so this other person, they may attract people that you wouldn't, but you're going to attract people that are turned off by them because you're you. You have your energy, you have your passion, you have your mission that you're on, and people will be attracted to that. And as we do that, I see that a lot with real estate agents I work with, where there's so, like, what they'll explain is there's so much competition in real estate. And I tell them it doesn't matter. There's only one you selling real estate. And once we tap into that and we bring that outwardly, that will bring the people in, which is exactly what it does.
And again, to add on that, it's a recent post that I saw. I'm a big fan of modern wisdom. Most of the time, I listen to the podcast with modern wisdom by Chris Williamson. So you have to forgive me whenever I quote him. So there was a guest, a woman, and I forgot her name, but she really said something that was powerful, where she said that perfection creates procrastination, whereas you have this perception of you have this perception of, okay, I want to start a podcast, but I need to buy the equipment. I want to get into a relationship. Firstly, I just want to be financially free. And we create so many excuses, actually not realizing that if I could actually destroy destroy the walls of excuses and start doing the things that I said that I'm going to do, I will actually eventually see I'll be able to start. And again, Alex Hamosi, where he said that so many people keep on looking for how to start, not the perfect time to start, not clearly knowing that the perfect
circumstances and everything to align. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in all honesty, I was like that also when I started this podcast. It's supposed to
We lived in a perfect world, we could have that. Right?
Definitely. Going back to you, actually, I've spoken more about myself a lot within my statement. In terms of how does SMT differ from other business coaching and personal development programs? What makes it unique and effective?
Yeah, the one thing that there's a lot of things about it, but mainly the biggest thing with it, and this is after taking program after program after program, spending tens of thousands of dollars on programs for 6 months and things like that and stuff, and walking away from going, man, there must be something the matter with me. And I didn't understand it. Once I tapped into the total mindset, once I started understanding subconscious and studied it for a decade, all of a sudden I could apply it and start noticing changes where one of the big areas where the SMT method differs from everything else is the SMT method sets up a unique pathway for every individual journeying on it. So if you went through the SMT method, you would have a different experience than somebody else. You may get similar results as far as if you're going for business growth or something like that, but your actual experience going down it because it's unique to your desires. It's unique to your conditioning. It's unique to what you want to experience in life. And that is how it works so well, really, better than I ever expected that it would, as it was coming to fruition and stuff. Because when you start tapping into that and you're going from your uniqueness, you're not one of a billion people. You're one individual, unique individual. And so many of the programs out there right now if you do A, B, and C, you're going to get D. And it's based on one size fit all. But our life isn't a one size fit all life. So where it doesn't fit into those types of things, we're left to our own accord to figure it out. The SMT method, with the one-on-one coaching and everything tied to it that I do, is to tap into that unique individual going down the journey and take them through that pathway. I've never had two visions that were the dynamic visions that were alike. They're unique to the individuals. I may run into circumstances of like fear being a big paradigm that people have that they live with in that subconscious conditioning, and it plays out in the voice we hear in our head and things like that and stuff, but it's never exactly the same fear. It's unique to every individual. So when we can do it on that uniqueness, what happens at the end is there is that rapid growth, but it's beyond just business growth. It's about a transformation of our life in the process of it.
I feel like we shouldn't actually end the podcast without talking about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, it's something that it's hard. I don't know about in the States, but in South Africa, it's a hard field because everyone wants to be an entrepreneur and everyone doesn't know anything about entrepreneurship. I remember listening to again a podcast by Stephen Bartlett, A Diary of a CEO. This woman, what was her name? I forgot her name. Actually, I forgot her name. Whereas she said that, where Stephen asked her, what advice do you have for young entrepreneurs in terms of, and she said that they shouldn't start a company early. They should actually start by building a skill and learn from people that they look up to, people that actually have money. So there are lots of challenges when it comes to entrepreneurship. And some people start entrepreneurship not knowing anything, without doing any research, thinking that have this perception about man. Okay, entrepreneurship has man. Like for example, I'm gonna sell apples. I'm gonna sell books. I'm gonna sell this and this and this. So, what are some biggest challenges entrepreneur face? How can the SMT method help them stay out ahead of the curve?
Great, great question. And entrepreneurs, you said it's hard. Do you know what makes it hard?
What?
The entire avenue of entrepreneurship is stepping in faith.
Mm, mm,
Because, and it's unique to each one of us. So you have all these people that are trying to create, pathways to cookie cutter pathways to bring people to entrepreneurship. But it's really impossible to ever achieve entrepreneurship by following a pathway such as that. Because your pathway to entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurship is going to be different than mine. And it's going to be different than each person listening to this. Entrepreneurship is about that free spirit living. It's about living in creativity and bringing it to fruition. And one of the best examples I have for you here is I find when I'm working with an artist or a musician or somebody that's in the arts field like that, in the arts area like that, they grasp the tools much quicker than somebody coming from business. And the reason being is business teaches us to be, logically focused, strategy based, goals and to-do lists and all of that to do what we need to do. Where when you look at artists and things like that, it's creativity that's driving them. And entrepreneurship is about stepping into, trusting our creativity to guide us, and then following that pathway as it shows up. In business, somebody that's been in business for a while, and I had to break this after 28 years in corporate America, in business is so logical and so strategic. Entrepreneurship is not a logical pathway. They try to make it that way, and all these programs and everything doing this try to make it that way, but it works for such like out of like somebody made it really big in entrepreneurship. They put a program together, every single step they took through it. And do you know less than 2% of the people following that ever achieve anywhere near what that person did? Because we're unique. And so entrepreneurship is about capitalizing on that uniqueness. It's capitalizing on the creativity. It's capitalizing on the dream and the vision, not strategic steps to get there. Because the steps we take are unique to us, to our conditioning, to our desires, to, all of that. What feels good. And I'll give you a great example of this, Asekho, is you ever see somebody doing a social media live? And they just love what they're doing, and they you could tell they're home, right? And they're excited and energetic, and their delivery is and all that stuff, right? And you watch that for a little while, right? And you ever see somebody do a live, and you can tell they don't want to be there, and they're uncomfortable, and they're stumbling over words and things. How long do you watch that one? I don't watch it very long at all because I feel bad for the person.
Yeah.
What we're experiencing is one person that's in that attraction factor. They're in their wheelhouse as far as what feels good to them, and the other person isn't. So when I'm working with my clients and we're developing systems of accelerating habits, it's based on uniqueness. Somebody who can't stand doing something like the lives or whatever it may be, that we don't spend time doing that and pushing it because it's something you have to do to be successful. We find out what does ignite them, and then we lean into doing that more often. But yeah, entrepreneurship is scary. It's probably more scary than hard, but it seems like it's really hard because we're fighting our instincts, we're fighting our conditioning, we're fighting all the stuff inside of us that says, man, you got to do it this way. You got to have a strategy and a plan and the to-do list and everything else, which is totally incorrect. It's a much bigger stepping out in faith. And it is a strategy we could put together and follow.
Definitely. I just want to, in terms of speak or two things that you mentioned, and I feel like my response it will come in a way of a question. Firstly, in terms of creativity and logic when it comes to entrepreneurship, I feel like more or less it's about the information. that we thought we have this perception that entrepreneurship, we are taught that entrepreneurship should be like corporate and compare ourselves as entrepreneur as these big companies, your Nike, your Apple, and your companies that actually use logic instead of creativity. And one thing that I've seen Apple has been doing has been more on the side of creativity more than logic, because in a way, even if you see their products, it's more or less about creativity. So what I'm getting at, how do you actually destroy that thing of thinking that of actually leaning? How do you lean on more on creativity more than on logic?
Yeah, we have to break through the logic and having the vision, taking steps. Like I said, the biggest thing I could do once I help somebody develop a dynamic vision, which is bigger than they know would know. They can't even put logic to it because they can't figure out how to make it happen. So the bigger the vision is of what they want to achieve, the less likely there is for logic to get in there and start messing with it. Most people, if you ask them what they want, they're going to tell you what they think they can do based on logic. But really, when you want to grow a company like what I've helped organizations do and go from, 7.5 to $23 million in a year, in 12 months, and then sustain that for the last 6 or 7, that's not logical. Our vision, if we really break into our visions are not realistic. It's unrealistic that this kid talking to you right now, or this guy talking to you right now, not that McKay anymore, was a kid who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, to a very low-income, blue-collar family who saw struggle his entire youth. Up into his 20s, he started experiencing that. It's unrealistic I would be here talking to you about this stuff. It's unrealistic that I would have went from blue-collar up to a vice president of sales in corporate America and led companies to their highest, to doubling, tripling companies, but then also to help companies in bankruptcy get back to profitability. It's unrealistic that I would do this. It's unrealistic that an organization, a worldwide organization, would invite me to come and talk to them on prosperity from where I came from. Our visions of what we truly want when we tap into them are unrealistic. So it makes it harder to apply logic to it. And so what we do is we start setting up these systems of accelerating habits. We start setting the plays and move that are unique to the individual that starts bringing about that vision. And as we bring about that vision, we over time get more comfortable living in that, stepping out in faith, in that, allowing things to show up. I'm sure you've had instances in your life. I know I've had a lot where I'm overhear somebody talk, or I have a question in my head about how to do something, and I overhear somebody, or all of a sudden a client comes out of the blue, or things like that happen that I could not have put together myself.
Definitely.
When we live logically, when we live through strategies and action plans, we shut that down. So there's all this that's available to us that by going into it and by living through that creativity, by living through the excitement of a vision, we start opening the doors to experiencing things just showing up easier than what we could manufacture through our thinking and logical minds.
And as I've said that earlier, previously, that I want to touch on 2 things that you mentioned. And I feel like instincts, again, are things that we actually should never fight, because in a way of most of the time they're right, and most of the time we don't act on them.
Yeah.
And to me, for example, going back to me when I say this podcast, as I've said to you, I was supposed to start this podcast in 2019, but I had this thing. Nah, I can't do that. I don't have a mind. Creating these excuses, not actually knowing that this thought that I had, the instinct of me actually branching into podcasting. And fast forward a year later, 2020, COVID happened. In a way of, it goes back to what Rick Rubin said. And in terms of, I read his book, in terms of ideas, he says that first you think about an idea. Whenever you don't think you don't act on it, it enforces it upon you through some circumstances. When I say circumstances, in a way of, for example, the way that I was so invested talking about mental health is the fact that in my own way, I had difficulties when it comes to mental health, and in terms of had depression for the longest time, and I'm still dealing with that and being able to learn more things. And when COVID happened, everyone was isolated and you had nowhere to go. Everyone didn't know what to do. And from there, that happened. So I reminisced and had those experiences of actually dealing with that mental health. So I I went back to actually my notes on my phone and looked at things that I wrote, which is the reason why the first time that I heard about actually what was podcasting was from Gary Vee. I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with him. So he his words were back in my head. You should start a podcast and start one podcast doing that there. And as much as I was hesitant, I had this force, had this force actually saying that you should start a podcast, you should start a podcast. So to people that actually are quite afraid of starting a business or or taking that one step to everything and involving in terms of advice, in terms of SMT, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. So anytime somebody is running into fear, it's a paradigm. It's something in that conditioning. We know people don't have desires and not want to meet them.
Definitely.
There's stuff that gets in the way and blocks us from doing so. And, here's what happens. Most people don't realize, a lot of people don't realize it's fear. A lot of people don't realize it's coming from their conditioning. So they blame outside circumstances. They'll blame COVID. They'll blame this. They'll blame that. But do you know how many, for instance, what we're talking about, do you know how many podcasts launched to a level beyond their expectations during COVID? And do you know during a boom time, how many companies, I'll say, lost traction and went downhill? The economy, the times, what's going on doesn't matter. What matters is that we're in alignment. We get that vision. And you talked earlier about, you called it intention, I think, or intent. I call it intuition. I don't remember what you called it exactly, but our intuition will guide us and lead us to that. It'll lead us for that answer to show up for the questions we have and everything else. But we have to get beyond our fears to do so. And with that, but our intuition is only as loud as our willingness to hear it. So if we're taking massive actions, exhaustive efforts, endless to-do lists, all this stuff that we're forcing ourselves to do in order to be successful, we're blocking that avenue, which is such a huge avenue to bring about easily and quicker of what we truly want. So it really is about getting into alignment. It really is. One of the big things I have to do with business owners I start working with is I have to get them to slow down a little bit, not work as many hours on trying to make it happen. Because in doing that, we're closing out all the activities and the potentials for things to show up without all the effort to it. So yeah, our intuition works perfect in every one of us, but it's only as loud as our willingness to hear it. So if we're going through life at 150 miles an hour, we're passing by a lot of ease and doing what we want to achieve. And nobody chooses to do that intentionally, but they don't take the time. People are taking the time. Some people really are not willing. They're just not willing to believe that something bigger is possible. And that person will never achieve that bigger thing. But even those people that believe that, if they're open-minded enough to say, okay, I'm willing to lean into this, they'll start shifting things and start opening those avenues up. And as we do that, as we step into and start bringing some of the excitement of the vision forward, our fear quickly depletes and just disintegrates. It just fades away in doing so.
And It's something that is quite important that you actually overcome your fears. And it's important that you actually listen to your intuition, because as I've said, that it's something that is never wrong. It's something that you always should trust. So actually, I'm seeing the time. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely.
Really love the conversation. You can go on.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Anybody that wants to reach out and continue this can do so at coachwithjoey.com and schedule a 15-minute call. We'll jump on the phone and talk about what's going on for you and see if I can get you some tools to shift it.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.